Welcome to this week's Able Diaries. I don't know how many episodes in. We don't say that anymore. We just say that the sun is out and it's midsummer.
22 is what Liam's saying there.
22. 29. Thank you, Liam. I'm doing the intro this week because I, like to spice it up a bit and keep Ben on his toes.
I feel lost and panicked. What do I do with my hands?
Well, I'm going to be the kind of interviewer today because we went to the NLA Tall Buildings Conference yesterday, which was hosted in Leadenhall, which Ben spent a long time designing, didn't you?
I did. I spent a long time. I was going to go and then I couldn't, so you went instead.
I did go instead, and I took a lot of the credit, and I saw some of the other people that had worked on it, and I did a long post about it, it was a really good day, and it was sunny, and it's got some terraces up at level
29.
There we go, and
27.
There you go, and we thought we might talk a bit about how you design and build a skyscraper, because I sometimes have a kind of little taxi cab pitch that I do about it, and I realised people don't really know, and I thought it might be quite interesting. You up for being grilled about it?
Gladly. It's my favourite topic. I'm very proud of that building, considering I started that probably 11 years ago, and they've only just sort of finished it now. And one of the reasons we started Able was I'd been on it for 5 years, and it'd not even broken ground, and I asked Ken, can I leave? And he was like, no, this is great. You'll be on it until the end. And I was like, so I see why these mega projects, they take so long. Like the Cheesecraper took 12 years, 22 Bishopsgate took like something like 15 years. These are mega, like lifelong projects. So it was really satisfying. I actually got a secret tour maybe 6 months ago. It's the first time I've been back.
Yeah.
And I felt like seeing, like, there was a delivery architect working alongside Mike who did it. And
check.
Yeah, Adamson's.
Yeah.
They were fantastic. They're a really good delivery architect. And you can ask me about that in a bit. What was great was he had no idea who I was. And he was so confused how I knew so much about the building. Like, how did you solve that? And he was like, how are you... Stop asking me.
It's because we've all designed it 3 times. And while Ben was doing Leadenhall, there was another building down the road called 40 Leadenhall, which I was working on, not for as long as you were on Leadenhall, but they were going up in parallel. So in terms of the story of how you get a skyscraper built in central London, almost... The first bit that I'm going to tease, for something like 40 Leadenhall, it's 100 metres long at its base. The first bit is basically procuring the site over decades and linking lots of random slivers and land and different ownerships together into a developable piece of land that is in a space that is, we don't have zoning so much, but is identified as potential for a tall building. So there's a huge amount of work, even before the architects come on board, about creating a development opportunity. So there's a whole piece of work there, isn't there?
Well, I guess I'm going to also almost explain this to Liam, which is, in London, there's probably 12 to 15 heritage sites, of which St Paul's is one. They're called these protected view corridors. London's probably got some of the most stringent view corridors. What that means is for example, there's a view on Richmond Park that looks directly at St Paul's, and nothing is allowed to be built inside. King Henry's Mount, yeah. There's one at Primrose Hill. There's all sorts of ones across. There's a really important one. Fleet Street is like, there's this really famous royal procession that went along Fleet Street. And it was a royal procession. It's like 100 years ago. And the carriage that took that route, nothing is allowed to be seen from that street. So if you stand in the street and look sort of west towards the city, you'll notice that the Cheesecraper slants back. A lot of these buildings sort of arch back the scalpel, and what that is the pitch of the roofs along that street. So and then you move to the side and you can see the entire city, but on that one point on the street.
So it's almost like we get the site to develop, then it's like, what are the constraints on this site? I mean, the biggest constraint is financial, that's one. But then physical constraints, you've got those view corridors. So can you imagine that you then put almost like a solid object where that view corridor is and says nothing can be built in that. And that's the first one. Yeah. Then you have local views, which are then chamfer something off again. Then we have rights of light. Residences, really important here. Offices, less so. You have rights to a certain degree of light. And that's not a hard and fast rule. There is a degree of negotiation then. But then you almost put in all these physical constraints in the sky, and then the space, you're left with the space.
Yeah. I guess ultimately the goal is you want to build the biggest building possible there. I mean, that is the ultimate purely financially driven goal. So if you imagine you have your area of the site and you just extrude it up 250 meters, and then there's a really cool rule. So at 300 meters in the city, there's an aviation rule. So that's why the Shard and 22 Bishopsgate are peaked at that. I think they're like, is it 200, maybe 300 meters? And anything above that goes into the city of airport, like plane route. So nothing can go above that. So buildings can't go above that height. But then the way that the planners treat it is they want to treat it as like a mountain. So the tallest one dictates the point, and then you sort of track a triangular line down, and that dictates the height. So then you start shaving off parts of the site to leave you with what you're left with. But I guess an amusing sort of side story is that that's the sort of physical maximum you can build. But then the political side is that, and you can talk a bit on this as well, is that the head of the City of London planning is a really prestigious role. And when we started One Leadenhall, it was Peter Rees. And when Peter Rees first developed a sort of the idea of the city, it had to be exemplary architecture. So it had to be this like iconic piece of architecture. It had to be so iconic that you would immediately think London. That's why the gherkin is that awesome shape. That's why the cheese grate is such a dramatic shape. He really pushed sort of, I'm saying lack of logical floor space, but it had to be so dramatic, such an incredible jewel in the crown, that's what drove the city. So when we first started One Leadenhall, the idea was that it was still in the slipstream of that idea. So it had to be iconic. So we did this like Jenga block tower that was like really dramatic, and it didn't look like any other tower. They all had to have their individual personality. And it was a pretty wacky scheme, and we've got models of it, and you look at it now and you think that would never get built now. But at the time, it was like crazy how it all interlocked. And then one of the reasons we redesigned it so often is then a new City of London planner came in called Gwyn Richards.
Yep.
And
he's still there, isn't he?
He's still there, and he's done an amazing job. And his goal is like, okay, London's seen as iconic, but the problem is the market wants logical floor plates, much more American style. You know, I want big square floor plates. That's what's going to attract the best offices. So he sort of pushed more into it still needs to be amazing, super high quality, but let's make it much more universally like a major city in New York or Chicago, or, you know, proper floor plates that anyone can move into, big legal firms. So suddenly we had to redesign it all with a much more, I guess, logical floor plate, but it still had to be iconic. And you were working on 40 Leadenhall, and at the time, 40 Leadenhall was slightly further ahead in development than One Leadenhall, but we were basically running both projects with the same team. So we were like, One Leadenhall was jokingly referred to as the fourth core because it was just starting. So we were in that sort of between state of like, what most people won't realize is that there's so many options of what a tower looks like. We'd probably done 100 sketch options.
So you end up, I think that's the thing I was trying to get to about this idea of a jelly mold. So although those shapes look really arbitrary, they're driven by, you can't go above this, these are the protected views, and you end up with a jelly mold that is your development opportunity. And in some cases, it looks a bit like a scalpel. In some places, it looks like a cheese grater. In some places, for 40 Leadenhall, it's this kind of step. And it's really, if you're being cynical, it's about how can you fashion this really abstracted jelly mold shape into something that feels like a deliberate piece of architecture without shaving off too much space. So you can do that by making fins that go back and forth. You can make it with a really sort of dramatic sweep. But that's basically, other than the walkie-talkie, which perhaps one for another episode, that drives that shape. And so that's the kind of physical constraints. And then you're absolutely right. There were kind of optimum floor plates. So generally the rule is 20% core to 80% floor plate is the maximum kind of perfect ratio, but it's not realistic. And you know, generally because of your site, you know, we had a high core and a low core, and that's going to change your efficiencies. And also, efficiency isn't the only thing. Although Gwyn's right, it does mean that you can attract American clients. Look at something like the Shard. It's crazy inefficient. You've got this huge core, you've got a really small floor plate, they've got apartments in there, they've got a hotel in there, they've got restaurants, and it was never driven by efficiency. Yeah, it's that's incredibly valuable.
That's a really interesting one. Is it Peter Sellers? He's the developer who did Shard.
Yeah.
Seller.
No, Peter Sellers is a comedian.
Oh, who am I thinking of?
It's just Seller.
It's just Seller.
Yeah.
So the deal with the Shard is that from this point on, Hampstead Heath. You've got this view from the top of Hampstead Heath. It's a protected view, and you've got St Paul's. And the site that they bought is in the shadow of St Paul's. So it goes against every single planning thing. You can't build a building there. So Renzo Piano's thing was like, well, we're going to build something so iconic that it'll actually help St Paul's, because we'll put a glass shield behind St Paul's. So actually what we're doing is like making it more obvious by putting this huge glass wall behind it. And but it will be amazing.
Ballsy.
And we will create this iconic piece of sculpture that will define St Paul's. And they were like, okay, but what it did is it created this pocket of land in front of the Shard, which they've now built a whopping building on.
But the Shard is an interesting story, and it's maybe one for its own day. But it was one of 5 schemes that were going in, and it was deemed the least likely to happen. It was the wrong side of the river. It was on a major transport interchange. You know, it was crazy tall. It broke all the view corridor. It was like the least likely. And so I remember all the contractors who were bidding for these various schemes. They sort of didn't really engage properly with the Shard, because it was just such such a high risk kind of suggestion. And then all the others fell away, and it went ahead. And Seller, who was a rag trade man, coming from fashion, and suddenly got this thing. And I think that's what I do love about property. It's a bit like the Grand National. You know, the favourite doesn't always win. Occasionally there's a big outsider that does it. But going back to like One Leadenhall, I did this story about how you make it, you piece together the land, you then work out your physical constraints, you then try and shape a building that is viable by being efficient. Then you go through this process of designing endless different massing. And then what is a pre-app to people that don't know? And what is it? You talk about Gwyn or pizza.
Yeah. Well,
how does that go?
There's like just before I go into that, there's like a final, I guess, why build these mega buildings there, right? There's a trade between, a lot of people don't like these mega tall buildings. They're like, it ruins the skyline or whatever. But the deal is, you get to build this massive building, and in return, what do the general public get? And again, One Leadenhall and 40 Leadenhall were at this like changing time where the traditional thing was like reception lobbies with these big, stark white boxes. That was a very Canadian thing, and I think Brookfield are a major developer in that area. And if you look at 100 Bishopsgate and One Leadenhall, they all have this like very
and it was the trend
grand,
in London. You'd look in, and it had huge artwork, more marble than you'd ever seen, and one lonely
and it
chap.
was prestige, and it was really important. And then slowly, what's happened is, if you want a taller and taller building, the gift you're giving back is you're creating more open space. So a lot of the new towers have these incredible ground floor amenities and lobbies. And like 40 Leadenhall, for example, has this, it's basically like a high street, like it's massive. And like One Leadenhall is such a constrained site that there's little coffee shops and things, but it doesn't quite have the space to do it. So what they decided was, you can either put a viewing platform on top as to give something back, but it's not quite tall enough. Why would you go to One Leadenhall and there's way bigger ones?
So just to pause that, there's a trade-off with the city where you say, we're going to do this, and they say, how is that going to benefit the public? And we'll come into some of the other benefits of tall buildings, but you have to give something, whether it's a gallery or a viewing platform or an amazing public realm or an educational facility. So it's that trade-off of what the scheme could afford to provide, and then, it's quite a creative process. You come up with the different ideas, like one undershaft, the Eric Parry scheme, they proposed putting the Museum of London at the top of it, and then an education facility. Anyway, so you were in these conversations.
Yeah, and then so the deal is Leadenhall Market's this incredible Grade 2 listed market, and it's like, Harry Potter was filmed in it. It's amazing, and it's very ye olde London. It's got these tiny little pubs. You go down into the basement of one, and there's the basilica walls of the Roman basilica walls. So our offer was, well, let's put a public terrace with mirrored glass on the top, which would reflect like Leadenhall back. And I mean, you went around there yesterday. I mean, it's such a unique space, but it's publicly accessible, and it's got a cafe and a restaurant up there. So it was really fun. Sort of the building split into 2 halves. So I think we'll come on to the pre-app. But the general gist now for these taller buildings, and you'll see this more, is that if I'm on the street, the building responds to the streetscape. So One Leadenhall has this stone level up to like the traditional buildings, and then there's a little step back, and then you have like a 150-meter tower. But it means that people on the streetscape, they can see, restaurant, co-working space, open terrace. It's a really fun, interesting building. And then the deal is, then I get to build a big tower above. But our building alone, ours, One Leadenhall, that had 3,000 people in it. and that's not nowhere near even 22 Bishopsgate has 7.
What is it occupying?
Occupying. So when it's being used, that's 3,000 people on a tiny 40 by 40 meter site. 22 Bishopsgate at the road is 7,000 people.
10,000 in 40.
Yeah, so you're talking hundreds of thousands of people. And again, the Elizabeth line was not anywhere near completing when we started this. And now the Elizabeth line ends at Liverpool Street. Suddenly, this area is exploding with more towers. So the pre-app process, so no one's ever seen this tower. No one knows it exists. It's the developers know we're developing it, but no one outside of that. So the pre-app, it's actually quite cool. We had to rent a church right near the site, and you open it, and it's the first time anyone from the public can come and see it. And you have all these boards up, and anyone from the public can come in, and you have to do it. So we had
That's a public consultation rather than the pre-app. So the pre-app is a conversation with the city planners, and it's a dance, isn't it? It's, the architects are coming up with different ideas. The planners, I'm meant to be saying whether it complies with public, national and local planning policy, but really they have a big say in the look and feel of it. And so that pre-app, and part of that pre-app process is a public consultation. What do people think? Getting buy-in. Now they call it participatory design and all these various things. But we're sent out as young architects to stand by the boards, and we all do shifts for over a 3-day period. And anyone can come in and say, well, they're pretty direct, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's the first time anyone's seen it. And what's really interesting, I mean, you can talk to this, but when the building goes up, when Leadenhall got built, there's nothing south of the building. It has these incredible views south of the river, and then west towards St. Paul's. Those are those money shots. But when we went to pre-app, there's a building across the road, north of ours. I think it's called 122 Leadenhall Street or 201 Bishopsgate. It's this step-back building. Their whole sales pitch was you have uninterrupted views south, and our building was literally going right in front of it. So at the pre-app, this very serious Japanese man came up to me, and he was like, what about the views from this building? And I was like, I quoted Ken, I was like, oh, well, cities like gardens, new things pop up. And he was like, well, we're the developer of that building there, and we're actually really unhappy about this. And I was like, cool. So then they went back and they made their building 30 meters taller. So they resubmitted planning, must have cost millions of pounds. And they were allowed to then make their building much taller. So their viewing platform went over the top of ours.
I think it's a good point to hold on that, because we design these buildings using the existing context, but to a degree, you've got to bear in mind the future context. I said on the video I made at One Leadenhall yesterday, it is amazing. You stand on this terrace and you have uninterrupted views, but next door there is another building coming up. So if you're too contextual, and then someone puts a big building next door, it can look just like a rather funny, isolated shape. So I think, but designing for future context is normally an architect's way of sticking a lot more mass on the side.
Well, what you'll notice as well is that there's trends in architecture. So normally there's a recession happening when the cost of land goes through the roof because it's all artificially inflated. But the flip side is the more difficult it is to build, the more stressed the city is that they won't be building stuff, the more relaxed planning sometimes gets. So, for example, now there is a lot of new towers. There's the Elizabeth line coming in, but also the cost of construction's gone up 50%.
Yeah, but on that, and so it sounds like a contradiction. I mean, these both things can be true at the same time. Last year, there were 35% fewer, or there was a drop of 35% in office construction starts, and we are going to see a massive shortage of office space in 3 to 4 years' time. There just isn't the capacity for the demand. And that's an interesting one because it's non-viable, really. I mean, it's not non-viable, and we can talk about Multiplex's view on that. They were they're absolutely viable tall buildings, but because of the cost, you might find Queen Richard's in the city having to say, look, you can all go a bit taller. Otherwise, they're just not going to go ahead, and the city's not going to be a place where big American banks want to come and be.
Well, what they said to us was they always want 110% office capacity, and what they mean by that is there should always be empty top tier office space because it makes the other buildings compete against each other. And if they
otherwise rents just go
otherwise it's just much easier for the landlords just to up the rent than to build a new building and try and tap tenants. So one of the struggles they're getting is that the city is now so popular because you are Liverpool Street to Heathrow in about 15 minutes now. It's incredible. And it's basically transformed how people see the city. The city has amazing views of St. Paul's. That's what people who come from all around the world, they want that view of St. Paul's. And the west view is sort of protected. So that road, you'll see all the skyscrapers just stop on that one road and they all look west. As long as you have a view of St. Paul's, that's how you get your money
So
shots.
I think we've done quite a lot on the commercials and the money and the practicalities. One of the points made at this conference yesterday, they had Brookfield, who are the developer, Multiplex, who are the contractor, Make Architects, who are the architects, various others. They had a kind of economist view. When you are in these tall buildings, they sell themselves. I mean, you're in there, and I felt like a kid at school. I was thinking, I wouldn't get any work done here. I'd just be staring out the window thinking, this is insane. You have these uninterrupted views. And even when they're interrupted views, you're seeing, the cheese grater from up close, or you're seeing these other fantastic pieces of architecture really close. I mean, it is spectacular. And why do people want to be in tall buildings? Because it's so incredibly exciting. And then when you go out onto the terrace, it is breathtaking. And a lot of tall buildings now are residential as well. There were some great facts. People pay a 29% premium to live in a tall building. Generally, they're within 1 mile of work, so people like to be proximate to work. Generally, their incomes are over £70,000. Lots of people in tech and finance. And it's like they cater for a particular bit of the market. And I know there is a housing crisis, and it's a bit insensitive not to acknowledge that there is a climate catastrophe, and there are all these other things. But it is serving a very particular part of that market. And when you're in the tall buildings, you absolutely see why, if you're a big American insurance firm or a big British bank, being in these offices feels aspirational. I mean, you do feel like a master, that you're literally looking down on the little people. I mean, it's absolutely
Well, I
insane.
guess for me personally, the most fun I ever had was once the jelly mold had been established and we sort of knew the boundaries we were working. We'd had the first pre-app. It was this crazy Jenga tower. The sort of the subtleties of what they wanted the design to look like was a bit more understood. And for 3 weeks, I was basically just with Ken and James. They were running around, James was doing all the meetings, and I was working with this really small team, and we were just doing these amazing 3D models. And we went through 50 different designs, and every week we would print them out or do huge cardboard models. The client would come in, but I was, kid in a sweet shop. I mean, I do it now all the time when we're doing Peak. We had this incredible 3D model of London, and we had all of these under NDA, this is what these other buildings are going to look like. So I saw what the City of London would look like in 10 years' time, because we had all these big buildings and we weren't allowed to show anyone. So, and I could zoom the camera around. And one of the things you talk about the balcony, this was just when VR was coming in, and we had this huge discussion about how dangerous that balcony might be, how safe the handrail should be. And it was a big conversation. Should it be super high glass? Should it be medium high glass, low glass? And we were like, no, that's way too low. So we moved it up a bit. Okay, but the balustrade. So I designed it all in 3D, put the VR goggles on, and then we got the clients to be look over that balcony, and they'd be like, Jesus Christ, you like that? So let's raise it, put a balustrade in, put some planters around the edge. You can't quite get to the edge.
I thought that was really good. It didn't feel low. It didn't feel obstructive, because if you feel like you're on the Empire State and you're looking through some plexiglass, it takes up some of that. You've got to feel the height, that's the pleasure of it. And I think the planting up there is fantastic as well. And it looks really, densely planted, actually.
So again, ask me more questions if there's something that comes up, but the planting is so specifically laid out for wind mitigation. So every single tree and pot plant is designed so when the wind whips down the glass, it's not going to yank your phone out of your hand. The doors have motors on, and if the wind blows it can slam the doors shut. Or reverse pressure, you open the doors and it rips the doors open. So everything on there is designed purely around wind mitigation and safety, but it's designed to look really lovely.
I mean, it was quite funny because we went, and it was a really good conference, but it was an unfitted out floor plate. So if anyone knows what a category A is, for people in the industry, that basically means no floor covering. You've got M&E, you've got basic M&E in, you've got basic lighting, but it hasn't got really anything else. And it was bloody hot because there wasn't any tenant M&E. So we were all in there celebrating the launch of this building. Everyone's dripping with sweat. So I was texting Stuart saying, put some M&E in next time. Ha, ha, ha. And it's like awful. These guys have spent years on it. And then you go and everyone from the industry's come and it's like baking hot. And we're all trying to defend the typology and discuss it. And it was like, actually, this cladding, do you have enough reflection of solar? Well, the only thing I was going to move on to a little bit is like, it's a very specific place, this city. You don't really have any residents, and it's the engine of finance. Financial services are our main export in England, and it is something very particular, and it has a particular set of rules of engagement. We have a big pre-app today with Aberdeen about a really exciting project, but their hopes and fears and concerns will be so different to what goes on in the city. And we both spent a lot of our careers in that particular thing, but now we're working around the UK and we're doing different types of buildings. It's a completely different story. So I wouldn't want people to think, those were the cares of a pre-app. A lot of it is about highways, and it's about compliance with the local and national plans, and your deep sustainability and drainage strategy, and showing that you understand a lot of the impact it's going to have on the public services and things like that. Whereas actually, tall buildings, they are part of the city, but they're going up, and weirdly, they're private. So I think there's a big argument about where should the city's remit start and end. Should you be paying kind of, as you go up, should you be getting public services at height? Should you be collecting rubbish from the 15th floor? It feels very kind of lateral, whereas the city now is a complete vertical.
Well, I guess the fascinating thing to me as well is there's two hats you wear. So there's the outer shell of the building, which is purely visual, and that has to work and look amazing. You have to go with current trends. The glass in it is a very specific type of glass, which we can come on to. But once you've done the sort of the outside of the building, then it's like, how do I build the engine, which is the core, the lifts, the toilets? And I cannot begin to stress to you how tedious isn't the right word, but if
you had a good time.
Yeah. Well, if you imagine the building split into two, I was lucky. I was on the facade element. So I did all of the planning. I worked with everyone on the planning and the facade and the materials and everything, and I managed that. But then part of the attrition of a big team is that people moved on. Like my boss quit, and then suddenly I was thrust into a position, and then
you quit,
and then another guy came in, and then he quit, and suddenly I was the only one on the team, and a few other people on our team who had all of the history and the legacy of the project. So I just suddenly became more and more important to every single meeting. And I do think part of me quitting was like, that BBC, that taxi driver who was on the BBC, and they think he's a scientist and he's not. And he's like, what am I doing on camera? There was like an element at the beginning of everyone's looking at me, and I was having to do a lot of the design, and suddenly every issue became sort of my issue.
Fundamental.
Yeah. And a lot of it, which I hadn't quite appreciated, and not to get too technical, but a lot of my favorite buildings, like the cheese grater, a lot of the services are expressed on the outside. I'm an engineer at heart. I like to see how a building works. But when you put the core as a visible part of the planning submission, if the core, every time the core changes, and we design that core, I'm not joking, 400 revisions of that core, you'd have to go back for planning. So a big early decision was, no, have the core in the middle, so you don't have to worry about
so that doesn't change.
So
to sort of round this out, I know it's been a bit more of a technical deep dive, but we are skyscraper geeks at heart. The thing you think you did best as a team on Leadenhall, and one thing that if you did it again, you'd change.
I was so proud of how hard our team worked. It was the first project to Makes Office that went into Revit. And I was fully 3D enabled, and I couldn't have done it without this. I felt so responsible for the team behind me, because they were doing all of the hard work, and I was doing all these meetings. So leaving was not hard from a business perspective, but leaving that team, I felt like they were like family basically. And so that I love that. And I think if I was to do it again, I think we were I wasn't in a position to truly fight for design decisions. That was that's one of the more challenging details, is that, who is responsible for the design ultimately? Well, it's Make, but it's also Brookfield have a very strong view on how things should look. and we have strong views on how things should look. And normally there's so many other variations and decisions that sometimes there wasn't quite as much maybe integration of certain things, but you'd never know that looking at it.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh man, if we'd have just done that and that would have solved loads of problems. So I if I knew now what I knew then, and now I understand why the like Multiplex, who were incredible, came on the project quite early, and I was quite, I was quite new to the whole Skyscraper thing, and they were like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And I was
They
like,
are brilliant. I mean,
Yeah,
Multiplex,
they're
tier
incredible.
one contractor. There's some of the work they're doing on AI driven design coordination is like best in class. So in my role as sort of today's host, I'm going to wrap it up there. I would encourage you to go to One Leadenhall. One of the challenges of these terraces at height, people don't know that they're allowed into them, and sometimes the buildings don't do the best job of advertising it. But you can go in, you can go up to the terrace. It's in the eaves of Leadenhall Market. You get some great views. The building is now open, so go down to One Leadenhall, go and have a pint in Leadenhall Market afterwards, and come back to Ben with your thoughts and comments.
On that, we've just set up we're going to call it Able Diaries at gmail.com as a way for you to just email questions. We've had a few other questions, but it's going to our info page and there's a bit too much information. So send in some questions and we'll answer them. And next week, we'll answer maybe our top 5 questions that people want to know. That's Able Diaries at gmail.com.
Thank you.